About 3 years ago, on one cold, snowy Saturday morning in February, I walked into a classroom at NYU, and I sat down at a table in a darkly lit room. Next to me was a journalist. The table in front of me were two recent graduates from college who are now lobbyists in DC. There were a few professors in the student seats next to me as well. There were about 15 of us in all. And the facilitators projected an image on the screen in front of us, and it was of toys holding protest signs. There was a doll about 3 inches tall, and she had her little stick with a white sign with words written on it in another language that I couldn't read. A few inches away from her, there was a small plastic monkey. Over next to that was a Lego man in a truck behind a moose, and they were all holding signs about corruption and electoral malpractice, and they were sitting in the snow outside of government buildings. And the signs read, "I'm for clean elections," and "A thief should sit in jail, not in the Kremlin." They shared an article with us, and its headline read, "Toys cannot hold protest because they are not citizens of Russia. Officials rule." The article from The Guardian read, "Local authorities declared the protest an unsanctioned public event." The people responded with a petition to hold another protest featuring 100 Kinder Surprise toys, 100 Lego people, 20 model soldiers, 15 soft toys, and 10 toy cars. It was rejected. They were told toys, especially imported ones, were not deemed to be were not deemed to be citizens of Russia. The number of people and their toys wanting to take part rose dramatically in the aftermath, and authorities did not back down. An activist was quoted saying, "It's possible that the people who have applied are inspired by their toys, and they consider them their friends. But the law, unfortunately, has a different point of view. Neither toys nor, for example, flags, plates, or domestic appliances can take part in a meeting." Toy rallies caught on, and they took place in 4 other towns across Russia in the wake of this protest. And the article continued, "Despite the ban, the group says it will look for another way." One possibility, said one of the activists, is a solitary picket, which is allowed to take place without permission from local authorities under Russian law. He said, "We will stand up one toy, and the rest will just sit on a bench a little bit further away." I was at a training conducted by the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. The center was founded by the authors of the book and the mini-series, A Force More Powerful. The center's purpose is to study nonviolent campaigns and to learn what makes them effective and successful. Their mission is then to share that information broadly. And so they offered this workshop for free, and they sent me home with about 10 books and 4 DVDs. And they have the most incredible, helpful website, and it's the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. After they shared this protesting toy story, they then asked us to get into small groups and to come up with similar kinds of smart actions that are considered lose-lose scenarios, ones in which you use humor, where you create a scenario where if your opponent doesn't respond, they look ridiculous, and if they do respond, they look ridiculous. We were encouraged to use humor. And one group had a censorship scenario. Another group was asked to think about the illegality of public gatherings. And the first group talked about, well, why don't we publish poetry to see if we can get the government to try to ban poetry? And the second group offered up the possibility of having kiss-ins and public planking demonstrations. We shared stories about people who had started wearing Putin t-shirts, that then they would put a bag across their body, so the strap would put a sign across his face. So they offered this training to us to try to demystify how do we wake up the dormant people power that we have. And at the training, we learned and we played, we had fun. We saw example after example of how people had reclaimed this dormant power, because while it may be dormant, it is always there. They asked us to hypothesize first ourselves, what do we think helps a movement emerge and be successful? Is it the level of education in general of the masses? Is it the level of poverty that people are facing? Is it the size of the middle class? The culture of the country, the amount of social polarization? Is its success based on, basically, the question was, is its success based on the conditions that are happening in the country? And then they asked, or is it about how people choose to resist? How do the skills and the choices that the people make impact the outcomes? And they shared with us that research shows that the success of a movement rests entirely on how people resist, not on the other factors or conditions happening in the society, but it rests entirely on how many people resist, the strategies they employ, and their commitment to a non-violent discipline. Each of these facets of a movement impacts the other. Here's a local example. So, as Bill said, this last Sunday, I've had since Sunday 20 people contact me to be a part of this legislative action work group to mobilize ourselves as a church, that we bring our faith and our values up to the Capitol. And I wonder how many people would have responded if instead I put out something in the order of service inviting you to come brainstorm with me how we could physically intimidate and block the legislators this session. Besides the fact that it's against our values and it probably wouldn't succeed, I doubt that many of you would show up. When violence is used, or the risk of violence, the risk to participate escalates and then people's willingness drops. Strategy also impacts participation. Compare these scenarios. A group of mine workers planned to strike to protest Pinochet's dictatorship in Chile in the 1980s. The military arrived and they surrounded the mine before the workers arrived, and so the labor leaders decided to call off the strike. People were asked instead to have a national day of resistance where they were each asked to work slowly, to walk slowly, to drive slowly, to slow everything down. And then at 8 o'clock at night, everyone was to start banging their pots and pans. A few years later, a student movement erupted in China, and while the protests in Tiananmen Square and the subsequent hunger strike drew in millions, and we've seen these profound images, they were eventually shut down by the government enacting martial law. They ultimately did not succeed because they never expanded successfully their demographic base widely enough across the nation. The trainers argued with us that they were too concentrated and they weren't able then to be shut down by military force. But imagine back in Chile, how could the military shut down people all walking and working and driving slowly? And the day of action, the fact that it was so widely dispersed, it put a crack in the wall of fear that people had felt about protesting and speaking out against their dictator when they had been faced with violent repression in the past. So with sound strategy and nonviolent means, more people will respond. So the trainers shared with us a book called Why Civil Resistance Works. It was written by two professors who are women. And the book was a major piece of research looking at the major political uprisings of the last 100 years. And they were looking at 323 different major political campaigns around the globe. And they wanted to know which kind of campaign, violent or nonviolent, was more successful. And here's what they found. There were about 200 violent uprisings and around 100 nonviolent. And in that 100 years, the nonviolent ones were almost twice as likely to succeed as the violent ones. They also found that 5 years after that uprising had happened, democracies only had a 15% chance of surviving if it was a violent means through which it was attained. However, it skyrocketed if the people used nonviolence, up to 84% likelihood that they would still be a democratic nation. And in part, we talked about why is that? Well, if you think about the skills that are needed to organize that broad of a base, you are setting yourselves up to create institutions and to be able to maintain democracy in a way that using a gun just doesn't. So the trainers reminded us, it's not about the conditions or the structures that you're trying to overcome. It's about the skills and the choices of the people and how we resist. So why am I sharing this learning with you now? I'm sure it's obvious. And why did I ask Austin to share his experience? Because I need something positive to focus on, something creative, something of purpose other than just trying to sit with my anger and my fear. With all of the executive actions and presidential memorandums that have happened this week, I lost count. There were more that I was reading overnight. There were 4 on Saturday, before the latest ones that came out yesterday. There were 4 executive actions and 8 presidential memorandums to advance things like the Keystone XL and the Dakota Access Pipeline, to build a wall, to cut federal funding for sanctuary cities, halting refugee entrance, detaining people at ports of entry, prohibiting funding to non-government organizations, including international service providers, if they even talk about abortion. And need I remind us that no agency ever receives federal money for providing an abortion? I don't want to waste all my energy or all of yours tracking all of the issues that have happened this week. I don't want to track all of his tweets and his chaos. I need a way to amplify the possibility of my own values. I need a way to protect my family and my friends who are vulnerable. And to do that, I need other people. If we're going to wake up our dormant power as a people, then we need each other. I have friends and a spouse who come from racial, ethnic, immigrant, and transgender groups whose people have been interned, exterminated, deported, and violated. Last winter, a Japanese-American friend invited me to hear a Japanese-American survivor of the internment camp down at the Des Moines Social Club. He spoke about losing his home, his possession, his freedoms, sitting there next to my friend. It turned what I had only read in history books into someone else's experience, and therefore into possibility that he might have to face. As a child, my husband's religious leaders thought it was necessary for him and the other children in their Jewish synagogue to know about the reality and possibility of mass extermination of Jews. And they taught it to him and his friends when he was 5 years old. I asked him if he thought that was a good thing, and he said, yes. We need to know. We need to be ready. It's not just history. It's the horrific reality some people have had to navigate through in the past, and that some people navigate through right now to survive each day. And you may think, as I do at times, maybe not as much now, but before the election we thought, oh, we're being alarmist. We can just wait and see. Well, I feel like ringing the bells. We are in an alarming state. And if you think I'm foolish, that's great. I would love to be a fool right now. I'm so okay with me being a fool, way more than I'm ready for my friends or family or the peoples of our community to be hurt even more. And I'm sharing my hope and my belief in nonviolent mass participation in movements also because I saw something on Full Frontal with Samantha Bee that is really unsettling me. She interviewed a Russian author and dissident, Masha Gessen, on her show just before the inauguration. Have any of you seen this? Samantha asked her, what's the recipe for successfully resisting an autocracy? And Masha said, I get asked that a lot. You know I had to flee my country. Most efforts to successfully resist that I know of failed. And then Samantha just runs the credits and says, well, that's the end of our show. And she said, okay, well, let me ask this. Are we at rock bottom yet? And they continue to list a whole bunch of things, and Samantha takes a pen and just keeps going down and down, further and further, of all of the things that we have seen our president do or say, even in the election process. And the author responds, no, we're not at rock bottom. Suppose some cities, and this was before the inauguration, she says, suppose some cities refuse to cooperate with deportations. So he calls on the American people to start reporting immigrants. That's when we start getting into some really disgusting territory. Is that rock bottom? Samantha asks. No, it's the beginning of a culture of citizen against citizen. Then that's rock bottom, Samantha says, to which Masha responds, there's a joke in Russia, we thought we hit rock bottom, and then we heard someone knock from below. Samantha said, maybe that has something humorous in the Russian dialect? And Masha said, well, Trump is very similar to Putin. He uses language to assert his power over reality. What he's saying is, I claim the right to say whatever the hell I please. And what are you going to do about it? Samantha responds, it's hard for me to believe that he has the cunning to be perpetrating this intentionally. And Masha says, it's instinctual. It's like a bully on a playground. Imagine the little kid who says to you, give me back my pencil box. And he says, I don't have your pencil box. But it's right there in your hand. No, it's not. There's nothing in my hand. And that's what he's doing. The point not so much is to take your pencil box as it is to render you completely powerless. Because everything you know to do, which is to say, it's right there, is useless. And then I was feeling, I think, just as panicky as Samantha Bee was when she says, is there anything I can personally do to resist this? And Masha responds calmly, the thing I think to do, actually, is to continue panicking. To continue to be sort of the hysteric in the room and say, this is not normal. And remember why you're panicking. Write a note to yourself about what you'll never do. And when you come to that line, don't cross it. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, said, between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power and our freedom. I share these stories with you this morning because hope is a muscle. And muscles don't get stronger by sitting around and thinking about using them. Or mine would be amazing. We don't gain endurance by just thinking. We actually get exhausted. We gain hope and strength and endurance by participating, by getting up, by doing something. Our muscles need to be worked. And queer activists in DC know this. They gathered outside of Mike Pence's rental house just before the inauguration to hold a gay dance party, glitter bomb! There were 200 people out there with rainbow flags, scantily clad, some dancing. They had 2 feet tall speakers blaring Beyonce, and people were chanting, Daddy Pants, come out and dance. Daddy Pence, come out and dance. It was organized by a group called Work for Peace, spelled W-E-R-K. Work! Their website says that they are a queer-based grassroots movement using all forms of dance to promote peace. And on June 12th, they said, dance was taken away from us. Today, we choose to reclaim it. Join us. The table in the hallway, you're going to find a resource that Bill Brock put together for us that has all of our legislators' contact info on it. Do what I did this weekend, which is to make sure you have all of your state and congressional members and representatives in your phone so that you can call them. I strongly encourage you to call instead of email or send a letter or a postcard, because those things can sit silently in an inbox. But phone calls require someone to answer and respond. They disrupt. They cause attention. You can sign up for our legislative alerts. You can join our group to figure out how we want to do this, how we want to bring our values to our state house. You can check out the indivisible groups that are forming online. You can check out the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. Now is the time to engage with our humor. Now is the time to exercise this muscle of hope. I'm inspired to see people who I've known who've not been politically active. When I looked up the indivisible groups, there's a guide created called The Indivisible that's around it was created by former congressional staffers, looking at the examples of how the Tea Party were able to gain attention and shift the national narrative. And so there are indivisible groups looking at how they did that and how we can apply them to promote our own values. And when I looked online to see who were leading these groups, I found one of my good friends was leading one. I found Mike Shaw, a member of our congregation, and I saw lots of other people in this church. Your face is already in the group. And I saw Kristen Bain, who started one for my district, who's a member of our church. These are the things to look for. These are the things the national press is not going to promote, but these are the things we have to celebrate. We have to keep our humor. There are frightening realities, but we have to be able to keep ourselves engaged. If I stay in the triggered, fearful place that worries about all of the harm that can happen, I don't function. I don't know about you, but the core of stress and anxiety that have been sitting in me, it's only useful if it motivates me to get up and do something. And then when I get there, I want to be with people who are finding clever ways to create lose-lose scenarios, where how can you stand against love? How could you? That's the movement I want to be a part of. So let's exercise those muscles of hope together, because now is the time to engage.